My father said the word family 3 times in 2 minutes. I counted. That was 5 weeks after the keychain, 3 weeks after I filed the corrected paperwork, and about 45 seconds before Ruth walked through his front door and sat down in his chair. Not her chair. His. The one at the head of the table where he had been sitting since I was 7 years old. He stopped mid-sentence. Ruth did not look at him right away. She set her purse on the floor, folded her hands in her lap, and when she finally looked up, her face was the same face she used when she was waiting for a pan to come to temperature. Patient. Exact. Already knowing what was going to happen, she told him she loved him. Then she told him she had removed him from her will. No volume, no performance. 12 words, give or take, in the same voice she used to tell me dinner was ready when I was small. Amber said something. Richard said something louder. I was watching Diane, who had gone very still, the way she always went still, when the ground shifted and she needed a moment to decide which story she was going to tell herself about what just happened. I was 31 years old and I was an emergency room physician, and I had spent the last 5 weeks learning things about my family that I could not unknow. And standing in my father's living room with all of it finally in the open, I did not feel the thing I thought I would feel. I felt tired, not defeated, not relieved yet, just the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding a door shut against something heavy for a very long time and has finally let go. 5 weeks earlier, on a Thursday in December, I was on I-95 in my 10-year-old Civic, still in scrubs, smelling like the hospital badge I had forgotten on the passenger seat. The badge smell is specific. Antiseptic and laminate and something underneath that, the particular staleness of a thing that lives clipped to your chest for 12 hours at a stretch. I had washed that lanyard 4 times and it still smelled like the ER. I wore it to family dinners without thinking. My mother had once asked me, very gently, if I could leave it in the car. I still forgot. The radio was doing something tinny and irrelevant. I had been driving for an hour and 40 minutes, and I was doing the calculation I always did on the way to my grandmother's house in Fairfield County. How long until I could reasonably leave, whether I could cite a shift, whether anyone would notice if I skipped dessert. Ruth had called me herself, which was different. My parents invited me to family things the way people invite you to obligations, with an assumption of attendance and no particular curiosity about whether you wanted to come. Ruth called me on a Tuesday and said she would like me there for Christmas dinner. She said it like an invitation. It landed like one. So I went. The house was a colonial on a cul-de-sac, white with black shutters. The kind of house that looked the same every December because Ruth kept it exactly the way she wanted it. The wreath on the front door, the candles in every window. The walk had been shoveled clean and salted, which meant she had done it herself because she would not wait for Richard to think of it. I could smell the inside before I opened the door. Pine. Roasting meat. Something warm underneath both of those, candle wax maybe, or the specific heat of a house that has been cooking all day. The smell hit me the way familiar smells always do, like a hand on the back of the neck, involuntary and immediate. Then, the antiseptic bag smell hit the warm air, and I was 2 things at once, standing in the doorway. The person who lived here as a child, and the person who worked nights now and carried the hospital everywhere she went. I unclipped the badge and put it in my coat pocket. Inside, 12 people were distributed around a table that Ruth had extended with the leaf she kept in the hall closet. I knew the math of the seating before I sat down. Amber was beside Brandon, who was in a navy blazer and had the particular posture of a man who had recently been told how important this dinner was. Richard was at the head, already laughing at something. Diane was between my aunt and my cousin, smoothing things before they needed smoothing, which was her particular gift. She always arrived at the emotional temperature of a room before anyone else and began adjusting it. I was at the far end, near the kitchen. That end of the table was where you put the person who would get up to refill things. The house was too warm the way holiday houses are always too warm, heated up for guests, and then left running past the point of comfort. My cardigan felt wrong on my shoulders. Too heavy. I had grabbed it on the way out and now it sat wrong. The seams too tight and I kept adjusting it without meaning to, throughout the appetizers, through the soup, through the bread, and the question about my drive, which was the only question anyone asked me all night. Not about the shift. Not about the hospital or the patient I had stayed an extra hour for that morning or anything else I had been doing in the preceding 3 months. Amber talked about a nursing conference she was attending in the spring. Brandon said something affirming. Richard laughed. Diane kept everyone's water glasses full in that invisible way she had, refilling without asking, without being noticed. I passed the rolls. I passed the butter. I counted. I counted questions directed at me versus questions directed at Amber. I counted the number of times Brandon was thanked for being there versus the number of times my drive was acknowledged. I had been doing this kind of counting since I was about 9 years old, when I first understood that the math of my family never came out even, and counting was cleaner than feeling. The number that night was lopsided in the usual way. I finished my plate. I had a second glass of wine. After the main course, before dessert, Ruth stood and took a small wrapped box from the sideboard behind her. She walked the length of the table and set it in front of me. The paper was plain red, white ribbon. The box was smaller than both my palms put together. I looked at Ruth, and she looked back at me, and her expression was the one I knew from when I was a child, and she was waiting to see if I could figure something out on my own. Patient. Already knowing the answer. I pulled the ribbon. I folded back the paper. Inside was a key fob on a plain metal chain, silver. The kind that came with a new car. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. The metal was still cold from sitting in the box, cold through the wrapping, and I turned it over in my palm and felt the specific weight of it, the solid pressed weight of something expensive reduced to its smallest form. Then the table went quiet, not silent. Quiet is different. Silence is an absence. This was 12 people making a simultaneous decision not to speak, and the sound of that decision was its own kind of noise, a held breath multiplied by 12. And underneath it I could hear the logs settling in the fireplace and the heat coming through the vents in the floor. Richard's fork went down, not dropped, set down, carefully. Diane found something on her plate that needed her attention. Amber's hand moved to Brandon's arm. I looked at the key fob, then at my father, then at Ruth. Ruth said, "Do you know what that goes to?" I said I didn't. She said, "I bought you a car last March. A Tesla. I sent the paperwork to your father. The registration is in your name. The insurance is in your name. I need you to know that." She said it the way she said everything, level and unhurried, with no decoration, like information, like something that had been true for 9 months and was only now being said out loud in a room where it could not be managed. My father said, "Mom, let's not do this tonight." Not, "What are you talking about?" Not, "There's been a misunderstanding. Let's not do this tonight," which meant there was a this. There was something specific that could be done or not done, and he knew what it was. Ruth looked at him the way she looked at the stove when she was waiting for the pan to come to temperature. She did not redirect. She asked me again. She asked me if I had received the paperwork, the registration, anything at all. Her voice did not change. She was asking me at a dinner table in front of 12 people, and her voice was exactly as calm as it would have been if we were alone in her kitchen. I said I hadn't. Amber stood up. She said something about helping clear the plates, and Diane immediately began stacking things with the efficiency of a woman who has spent decades managing the transition from difficult moment to next activity. They moved around the table with purpose. Plates lifted, glasses gathered. The table became a project. I stayed where I was. The key fob was still in my hand. I could feel the weight of it, the cold pressed into my palm, the small ridged edge of the buttons along one side. A car I had never seen, a gift I had never received, a registration in my name for something I did not know existed. My father was looking at the centerpiece. 12 pillar candles in a pine arrangement that Ruth had made herself, the way she made it every year. He was looking at it with the focused attention of a man who was not going to look at me. I set the key fob down on the table in front of me, in the cleared space where my plate had been, and I left it there. The key fob stayed on Ruth's tablecloth for the rest of the evening. Nobody touched it. Nobody mentioned it again. It sat there through dessert, through the coffee, through the goodbyes at the door, where Amber hugged everyone except me. And when I finally left, it was still there, catching the candlelight. And Ruth pressed my hand at the door and did not say anything at all. I drove the first 40 minutes on muscle memory. The highway in December at 9 in the evening is a particular kind of empty, the kind where you can see your own headlights doing more work than they should. And the radio was still doing something I wasn't listening to, and I had my badge clipped back on without thinking about it, and I kept seeing my father's face. Not the angry version, the careful version. The version where he set his fork down without making a sound. Simone picked up on the second ring, the way she always did when she wasn't on shift, like she was waiting for the call before she knew a call was coming. I told her the story. All of it. The box, the key fob, the registration in my name, the insurance in my name, the car I had never seen. Ruth's voice not changing. My father's fork on the tablecloth. Amber in the plates. Simone listened the way she listened to patients presenting, without filling in the pauses, without rushing toward a diagnosis. When I finished, she said, "If the registration is in your name and something happened to that car, anything at all, who is responsible?" I said I didn't know. She said, "Find out." That was all. I said I would. We hung up. The highway kept going. I drove the rest of the way home with the heater on too high and the radio off, and Simone's question sitting in the passenger seat where my badge was, and I told myself I would look into it when I had time, which is what I told myself about everything that scared me. I didn't look into it that night. I went to bed at 11:30, and I worked a double the next day and a half shift after that, and I told myself the question would keep. It kept for 3 days. My father texted me once. "Everything is fine. I'll explain when things settle down." I read it standing in the break room with a cup of coffee going cold in my other hand. And I read it again, and the phrase "things settle down" did something to the air around it. Things settle down implied things that were currently unsettled. It implied a process already in motion, something that had been disturbed and was waiting to return to a resting state. You don't say settle down about something that was never moving. I didn't answer him. I put my phone in my coat pocket and went back to the floor. 3 days after Christmas dinner, on the morning of my next shift, I pulled into the hospital parking garage at 5:47 in the morning and sat in my car for 11 minutes before going in. And in those 11 minutes, I thought about Simone's question, and I thought about my father's text, and I thought about the key fob on Ruth's tablecloth, and I thought about the weight of it in my palm, heavier than something so small should be. Then I went inside and put on my badge and went to work. The case came in at 9:14. Older man, 63, walked out of a parking lot on New Britain Avenue and got clipped by a car that didn't stop. He was upright when they brought him in. Superficial laceration on his forearm, some bruising along his left hip, the particular wince of a man who was embarrassed to be there and kept saying he was fine in a way that meant he wasn't sure yet. I got him settled and started the intake, and his daughter was there, 30-something. Practical coat, the specific tense calm of a person who has been in waiting rooms before and knows how to be useful in them. While I was working, Dr. Ferreira, one of the other attendings on the floor, was on the phone with the intake coordinator about the police report, and I could hear fragments of it, the way you hear a conversation happening 2 feet away when you're focused on something else. Parking lot camera on the northwest corner caught the plates. Witness filed a phone report within 10 minutes. Paint transfer on the victim's coat matched a late model sedan. Could narrow the make. Ferreira was precise about it, the way she was precise about everything. Walking through the evidence, the way you walk through a differential, item by item, nothing wasted. The man on the table said his wife was going to be upset. I told him his wife was going to be glad he called us. When we were back at the station, I said to Simone, who was finishing a chart at the next terminal, that these cases always have more than people think they will. She looked up. I said, cameras everywhere now, phone location data, witnesses who write things down because they have phones and the habit. I said the coverage was different than it used to be. I said it as professional observation, the way you note a change in how cases are presenting over time, nothing more than that. Simone said, I went back to my chart. The observation sat in the room for a moment, and then it was gone, or I thought it was gone, because I didn't know yet what I was really saying. That night, I looked up my vehicle registration history on the Connecticut DMV portal. It took 4 minutes to find the page, and 2 more minutes to navigate to the right section, and then the Tesla was there, registered to my name, my address, the Connecticut address I had been at for 3 years. What was also there, below the registration entry, was a notation. An insurance claim filed against the vehicle 1 month prior. A claim number. No other details from where I was sitting. No specifics about what the claim was for or who had filed it. Just the number and the date and the fact of it, sitting there in the registration history under my name. My hands didn't move. I read it once. I read it again. An insurance claim I had not filed. Against a car I had never driven. Under my name. I closed the laptop and sat at my kitchen table in the quiet and thought about it for a long time. And then I opened the laptop again and looked at it again to make sure I had read it correctly, and I had. I called my father the next morning. He didn't pick up. I called him again that afternoon. Nothing. The third call was 2 days later, and he sent it to voicemail while I was still listening to the ring. His text came an hour after that. Everything is fine. I'll explain when things settle down. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and went to make dinner. And while I was standing at the stove, I thought about his face when he set the fork down. The care he took with it, the sound it didn't make. Ruth called on a Thursday morning while I was between shifts. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She asked if I had contacted the insurance company yet, and I said no. And she said that before I did, she thought I should speak with someone who could explain the claim that was filed. She gave me a name, Alan Forsyth, a firm in Hartford, civil litigation and estates. She gave me a number. She said she had already spoken with him and that he was expecting my call. I wrote the name down on the back of an envelope. She said, Maya. I said yes. She said, call him before Christmas becomes something else. She hung up. I looked at the name on the envelope for a while. Then I looked at the number. The envelope was from a credit card offer I'd been meaning to throw away for a week, and the number was in my own handwriting, a little uneven because I'd been holding the phone against my shoulder to write it. And it looked like something ordinary. A dentist appointment. An electrician. I set it on my kitchen counter and went to my shift and thought about it the whole way there and the whole way back. And when I got home at 7 in the morning, it was still on the counter and I had not yet called. I wasn't ready to know what it meant that my father wasn't answering. Alan Forsyth's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Asylum Avenue, which was a name I had always thought was too honest for a street in Hartford. The elevator was slow. The waiting room had the particular quiet of a place where people came to talk about things they had not told anyone else yet. Low carpet-framed prints of nothing. The receptionist looking up once when I came in and then back down at her screen. Forsyth himself was smaller than his voice on the phone. Late 50s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of careful stillness that came from spending decades in rooms where people were trying not to fall apart. He had a yellow legal pad and a pen he didn't use. He let me sit down and get settled before he started. He said he was going to tell me what he knew, and that some of it would be difficult to hear, and he wanted me to ask questions as they came up, rather than waiting until the end. I told him I was an emergency room physician. He said, good. Then you know how to listen to things you don't want to hear. He laid it out the way a good clinician would, in order, without editorializing. The car had been in my name since March of the previous year. The registration listed my Hartford address. The insurance policy was in my name with my address linked to my identity. In November, 2 months ago, an insurance claim had been filed against the vehicle. The claim reported the car as stolen. It gave a date. It gave a police report number. The claim had been filed by my father, using my name, using my address. The police report number referenced a report that did not exist under my name in the Hartford system because I had never filed one. The insurance company had processed the claim and paid out. The car, according to the claim, was a total loss, stolen and unrecovered. Except the car had not been stolen. The car had been driven through December and into January, as established by parking garage records and toll data from I-95 showing the vehicle moving regularly between Fairfield County and Hartford. The car that my father had reported stolen under my name had been, during that same period, in the regular use of my sister. Forsyth said all of this without pausing. He said it the way you say a lab result, with the understanding that the number is the number, and your job is to make sure the person across from you understands what it means. I understood what it meant. I said, that's a fraudulent insurance claim. He said, yes. I said, filed by my father. He said, using your identity and your address, yes. The room was very still. I could hear the building's heating system, a low, even hum from somewhere in the walls. I had my hands in my lap and I kept them there. Forsyth waited. He was good at waiting. Then he told me about Carol Tremblay. November 14th. A grocery store parking lot in Glastonbury, 2 miles from the house where my sister had been living since March. A woman crossing at the painted crosswalk in front of the store entrance. The Tesla came through the lot at a speed inconsistent with the parking area, struck her on the left side, and drove away. The driver slowed for approximately 2 seconds and then accelerated. Carol Tremblay was 57 years old. She was a retired teacher. She had been shopping for Thanksgiving supplies. She spent 6 weeks in physical therapy for a fractured hip and soft tissue damage to her left shoulder, and she kept every receipt, every appointment record, every photograph. Every piece of paper that had anything to do with what happened to her on November 14th. Amber's phone had been pinging cell towers in Glastonbury at the time of the accident. The timestamp on the tower data matched the accident report filed by Carol's witness, a man who had seen the car from across the parking lot and written down the plate number on the back of his grocery receipt before going inside. The plate number was the Tesla's plate, the Tesla registered in my name. Carol Tremblay's attorney had contacted Forsyth's office in December looking for the registered owner of the vehicle to serve papers. That was me. I was the registered owner. I was the defendant in a civil suit I had not known existed until approximately 4 minutes ago, sitting in a chair on Asylum Avenue with my hands in my lap and the heating system humming inside the walls. Forsyth said, "You can be cleared. The phone data placing your sister at the location is substantial. The parking lot camera at the store entrance captured the vehicle and the driver's profile. The plate, the timestamp, the tower data, the witness statement, they are all consistent. But until your name is formally removed as the responsible party and your sister's name is established as the driver, you carry the exposure." He said, "You have to act, and you have to decide how." I did not say anything for a moment. He let me not say anything. I thought about the man in the parking lot on New Britain Avenue, the one I had treated last week, the one whose wife was going to be upset, the laceration on his arm, the bruising along his hip, the way he kept saying he was fine. I thought about what it had cost him to be fine. I said, "Does my sister know about the lawsuit?" Forsyth said she did not. Amber believed the hit and run had gone unrecorded. She believed Carol Tremblay had not identified the plate. I said, "Is there anything that requires me to warn her?" Forsyth looked at me over his glasses for a moment. He said, "No." I said, "Good." He closed his legal pad. I stood up and put on my coat, and I shook his hand. And I took the elevator down and walked out onto Asylum Avenue and stood on the sidewalk in the December cold for a moment with my hands in my coat pockets. Then I drove to the hospital, not because I had a shift, because I needed somewhere to put myself. I sat in the parking garage on level 3 for 40 minutes, the engine off. The garage quiet except for the occasional sound of a car moving on a lower level, tires on concrete, the mechanical voice of the ticket machine at the entrance. I thought about 3 surgeries from the previous month, 3 patients I had stabilized and handed off and followed up on, 3 people whose names I still knew, whose charts I still thought about occasionally when I was driving or eating or trying to sleep. I had spent 12 hours one night trying to give a man back the use of his left hand. I had sat with a woman while she waited for news about her daughter, and I had told her the truth about what the truth was, which was the hardest thing I knew how to do. I thought about the keychain on my kitchen counter, where I had put it after Christmas dinner. Still there. I checked sometimes, not on purpose. I called Simone and said I needed a few days. She said, "Whatever you need." She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what had happened. That was the thing about Simone. She trusted that you would tell her what was relevant when it was relevant, and she didn't fill in the space around it. I drove home. I made tea. I didn't drink. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the envelope on the counter with Forsyth's number on it, which I no longer needed because I had already been to his office. And I thought about my father filing a claim in my name, typing my address, my identity used as a container for his choices. I thought about Diane in the kitchen doorway, 1 second, her eyes finding mine and something moving through them, something that was not quite an apology and not quite an acknowledgement, but was close enough to both that I had been thinking about it since Christmas. Then she turned back to the living room. She chose the living room. She always chose the living room. I thought about how long I had been the one who absorbed things. 2 days later, I called Forsyth and told him I wanted to come back. His office had the same quiet, same carpet, same print on the wall that was trying to be calming and mostly just succeeded at being neutral. He had his legal pad again. This time, he used the pen. He started with Ruth. Over the previous 8 months, beginning the week after she bought the Tesla and sent the paperwork to my father, Ruth had been building something. Insurance documents, the full paper trail of the DMV ownership history, each transfer, each filing, the registration in my name from the beginning. A phone log she had requested through her own carrier, covering the 10 days after November 14th, showing calls between my father and my sister. 14 calls in 9 days, most of them less than 3 minutes. One of them on the evening of the 15th, 22 minutes. And then Forsyth set a printed transcript on the table in front of me. He explained that on the evening of November 15th, Ruth had been in my father's kitchen. My father and Amber had been in the living room, on the phone. Ruth had been sitting at the kitchen table and she had her hearing aid, in which she sometimes did not, and her phone had been on the table in front of her. And she had opened the voice memo application and pressed record. My father's voice on the recording said that Maya did not know about the claim, that Maya would not know, that there was no reason for Maya to know because Maya was never home and never paid attention to this kind of thing anyway. Amber's voice said, "Are you sure?" My father's voice said, "I'm sure." I read the transcript. I read it again. I thought about my grandmother sitting alone at my father's kitchen table on the evening of November 15th, with her hearing aid in and her phone face up, and the voice memo running, while her son and her granddaughter had a 22-minute conversation in the next room about making sure I would never find out. 8 months. She had spent 8 months doing this alone, without telling me, without warning me, without anything except the Christmas dinner invitation, which was not an invitation at all. It was a deadline she had set for herself, and a stage she had built, and a moment she had planned for long enough that she knew exactly how she wanted it to go. The Christmas dinner was not spontaneous. Ruth had called me in November. She had timed it. She had put the whole family in one room because she wanted witnesses. And then she had handed me the key fob in front of all of them and waited to see what my father would do. And he had told her not to do this tonight, and she had done it anyway. Forsyth was watching me. He let me have the silence. I looked at the transcript. I looked at the phone log. I looked at the stack of documents Ruth had assembled over 8 months, alone, methodically, without telling a single person except her attorney, and I understood for the first time that I had not been watching a family argument. I had been watching the end of a very long game that someone else had been playing very quietly for a very long time, and the Christmas dinner was not the beginning of it. It was the move she had been building towards since March. I set the papers down. Forsyth said, "What would you like to do?" I said I wanted 2 things. I wanted my name formally removed from the insurance claim. A written statement from me that I had not authorized the original filing and had not been present for or aware of the incident it described, and I wanted to cooperate fully with Carol Tremblay's civil suit. Whatever her attorney needed from me, statements, documentation, access to the registration records. Forsyth said that once I submitted the corrected claim, the insurance company was required to flag the original as fraudulent and refer it to the state attorney general's office. He said it would be automatic. He said I would not need to make any additional calls or file any additional complaints. The process would do it. I said, so I just have to tell the truth. He said, that's all. I asked about the timeline. He walked me through it. The corrected claim would be filed within the week. The referral would go to the AG's office within 10 business days of the fraud flag. Carol's civil suit had been filed months ago and was already moving forward on its own track, separate from the insurance matter entirely. The 2 proceedings were parallel. One did not cause the other. Both were already in motion. I had one more question. I said, "Does Amber know about the lawsuit yet?" He said no. She still believed Carol had not identified the plate. I thought about my sister at Christmas dinner, her hand moving to Brandon's arm, the practiced warmth of her voice when she pulled me aside and said, "You know how Dad is." Her absolute total certainty that she had managed it. She thought she had managed it. I said, "Is there anything that requires me to warn her?" Forsyth said no, there was not. I picked up my coat. Outside, the afternoon had gone gray and cold in the way Hartford went gray in January. A flat, even gray that felt permanent, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in. And then I walked to my car and drove home with the heat on and the radio off, and I did not feel victorious. That is the word people use in situations like this, and it did not fit. What I felt was the specific clarity of someone who has stopped waiting for something to be different than it is. My family had used my name to cover a crime. Not accidentally, not through misunderstanding. My father had sat in an office somewhere and typed my name and my address and submitted it as his own information, and my sister had let him. And my mother had watched from the kitchen doorway for 1 second and then gone back to the living room. And for 31 years, I had been the one who was always fine and always manageable and would always absorb whatever needed absorbing because I never exploded. I had been useful to them in ways I had not known to name until now. Simone had asked me what would happen if I stopped. I had not answered her. I had sat with the question in my car in the hospital parking structure, and I had not answered it because I did not have the answer yet. I had it now. If I stopped, the truth would have to go somewhere else. It would have to land on the people it actually belonged to. It would have to be theirs. I pulled into my parking space and sat for a moment with the engine off. The key fob was still on my kitchen counter. Had been there since Christmas. A car I had never seen, a gift I had never received, now a piece of evidence in a civil suit my sister didn't know was waiting for her. I went inside. I signed the paperwork Forsyth had sent over. I used my own pen, the one I kept by the door for things that needed signing, and I wrote my name on the statement that said I had not filed the original claim and had not known about it and had not authorized anyone to use my name to file it. My own name on a document, correcting what my father had done with it. I folded the papers into the envelope, sealed it, and set it by my bag to mail in the morning. Then I stood in my kitchen in the dark for a while, not turning the light on, just standing there with the city coming through the window in the way it did at night, orange-gray and steady. I thought about Ruth at that kitchen table with her phone face up. I thought about how many rooms she had sat in, over how many years, watching what Richard let happen and what Amber got away with, and how long she had been waiting for the thing that would be too much, the thing she could not let settle. She had found it in November. A woman in a parking lot in Glastonbury struck and left, and Ruth had pressed record. The corrected filing went out on a Tuesday. Forsyth called to confirm receipt on Wednesday afternoon while I was in the hospital break room eating a sandwich I had bought at 6 in the morning and forgotten about until 2. He said everything was in order. He said the fraud flag would process within the week and the referral would go automatically after that. He said I didn't need to do anything else. I said, "What about Amber?" He said Carol Tremblay's attorney would be handling that. He said it in the measured way he said most things, which meant it had already been arranged and was already in motion, and I did not need to think about the logistics of it. I finished the sandwich. I went back to the floor. The week between the filing and what came next had a specific quality to it. Not suspense exactly, more like the feeling after you have made a decision that cannot be unmade, when the work is done and the outcome is pending, and all you can do is continue being a person in the meantime. I worked my shifts. I slept when I could. I called Simone on a Thursday evening and we talked about nothing in particular for 40 minutes, which was one of the things I valued most about her, that she could talk about nothing in particular with full attention, as if nothing in particular was exactly what the moment required. I did not call my father. I did not call Amber. I did not call Diane. Diane called me once on a Sunday morning, and I looked at her name on the screen for the 4 seconds it rang, and then I let it go to voicemail. She did not leave one. I was not surprised. On the 11th day after the filing, I was at my kitchen table at 11:14 at night. I know it was 11:14 because the clock on my laptop said so when I finally opened the screen. I had been sitting in front of it for 7 minutes with it closed. The radiator was doing its thing, that low, uneven ticking it did when the temperature outside dropped past a certain point, and I could hear a car going by on the street, and the building was otherwise quiet in the way buildings were quiet at that hour, that particular settled quiet that meant most people had given up on the day. My hands were in my lap. The cursor blinked when I opened the screen, white and steady and waiting. I typed the account name. The one Ruth had confirmed was in my name. The cloud account tied to the car's registration. The account where the dashcam would have been uploading automatically since the day the car was activated. Ruth had told me in Forsyth's office during the second meeting that the car had been registered to my account from the beginning. She had said it like a detail. Forsyth had flagged it as relevant. I had written it down in the margin of the notepad I brought to his office and circled it once and not looked at it again until now. I pressed enter. The account loaded. 11 months of footage. Organized by date, each clip labeled with a timestamp and a location, the way dashcams logged everything, indifferently and completely, because that was what they were designed to do. They did not know what was worth keeping. They kept everything. I scrolled to November. November 14th was there. I clicked on it. 112 seconds. The footage was front-facing. The camera mounted behind the rearview mirror looking out through the windshield, and it showed a parking lot in the afternoon light, a grocery store entrance, the painted stripes of a crosswalk, and a woman crossing, carrying 2 bags, the reusable kind, the stripes of them visible even in the dashcam quality footage. She was moving at a normal pace, not hurrying, in the crosswalk, in the right place. The car was moving too fast for a parking lot. I watched it. I watched the car not slow down the way it should have. I watched the impact, which I will not describe in the way a camera describes it, clinically and without mercy. I watched the car slow for approximately 2 seconds. I watched it accelerate away, in the reflection of the storefront window to the right of the entrance for approximately 4 seconds. As the car moved past, there was a face. The driver's side. Profile. Then 3/4. Then gone. Amber's face. I sat with my hands very still on the table, and I watched it again. Then I closed the laptop. The radiator ticked. A car went by on the street. I thought about sitting across from Amber at Christmas dinner, her hand on Brandon's arm, the particular warmth of her voice when she said, "You know how Dad is," the complete and total certainty she had worn all evening like a second outfit, the certainty of someone who believed the thing she had done was contained, managed, finished. She had been wrong about the cloud sync. She or Brandon or both of them had wiped the physical card and believed that was the end of it. They had not known about the account. They had not known that every second of footage had been going somewhere they couldn't reach, filing itself neatly into a folder under my name, waiting the way Carol Tremblay had waited, with her receipts and her appointment records and her photographs, keeping everything. I opened the laptop again and forwarded the clip to Forsyth's office with a single line of text. "Found it. You responded at 7 the next morning. 2 sentences. We'll take it from here. Call me at 9. At 9, he told me about Brandon's purchase history. Forsyth had subpoenaed it as part of the discovery process, and in it, on November 15th, the morning after the accident, there was a purchase at a pharmacy 3 blocks from the apartment Amber and Brandon shared. A micro SD card. The kind that went in a dash cam. Bought the morning after, which meant he had gone to the car the morning after, opened a dash cam, removed the original card, and replaced it with a blank one. He had assumed that was the footage. He had assumed that was all there was. He had been in the passenger seat. I let that land for a moment. Brandon, in his navy blazer at Christmas dinner, cutting his meat, affirming whatever Amber said, smiling at me across the table with the easy smile of a man who believed the problem had been solved in a pharmacy parking lot on a Tuesday morning. He had watched it happen. He had helped cover it. I thought about the way he had shaken my father's hand at the door when they arrived. The firm handshake, the eye contact, the particular performance of a man who was joining a family and wanted to demonstrate that he understood what that meant. Forsyth said Brandon's attorney had already been in contact. He said the word immunity. He said it would mean a full written statement about the card disposal and what Brandon had known and when. I said, fine, I meant it. I was not interested in Brandon. Brandon was a person who had attached himself to something that looked like it was winning and would now detach himself in the same spirit, with the same efficiency, because that was who he was. He was not interesting to me. He was just someone who had been in the car. The corrected insurance claim had gone through. The original had been flagged. The referral to the AG's office was processing. Carol Tremblay's civil suit had a name on it now. The right name, and the suit had been moving for months before I ever sat in Forsyth's office, moving on its own track independently. waiting only for the formal establishment of who had actually been driving. That was now established. Amber did not yet know. She found out on a Tuesday evening the following week. Forsyth told me afterward how it had gone. The process server had gone to her apartment building, not her parents' house. Not the hospital where she worked, but her own apartment on the second floor of a building in Wethersfield, because that was where she lived and that was where she had to be found. She had answered her intercom and then her door and been handed the papers. Carol Tremblay's name was on the front of the envelope. Amber called Richard within the hour. Richard called Forsyth's office within the hour after that. Forsyth's assistant told him Forsyth was unavailable. She said it pleasantly and completely, the way a well-trained assistant said things that were not going to change no matter how many times you asked. I know because Forsyth told me and because I had been at the hospital when it happened finishing a chart at the nursing station, and my father had called me twice in the space of 40 minutes. Both calls I let go to voicemail. He did not leave messages. He texted once, a single line, "We need to talk. Call me." I finished the chart. I drove home. I made dinner. His second text came at 9:30 that night. A family meeting, he said. Saturday. His house. He expected me there. Not invited. Expected. I read it at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cool in front of me, the same table where I had sat 7 days ago with my hands in my lap and the laptop closed. And I thought about the word expected and what it assumed. It assumed I still operated inside a system where his expectations had weight. It assumed the architecture of the last 31 years was still standing, that I was still the person who came when called and absorbed what was given and kept the peace because someone had to, and I had always been the one. I texted back, "I'll be there. I would be there." That was not capitulation. That was a different thing entirely. Saturday was gray and cold, the particular flat gray of a Connecticut January that felt like the sky had simply decided and was not open to further discussion. I drove to my father's house in Wethersfield in the same Civic I had driven to Ruth's house on Christmas, and the heat worked and the radio did not, and I drove in silence thinking about nothing specific, which was a thing I had learned to do in the ER when I needed to be present for whatever was coming and couldn't afford to arrive already full. His house was a split level on a cul-de-sac, brick face, the landscaping neat in the way things were neat when someone cared more about appearance than about gardening. The driveway had 2 cars, my mother's sedan and Amber's car, a gray Camry with a dent in the rear panel she had been meaning to get fixed since August. The front door opened before I knocked. Diane was standing in the entryway. She was wearing the blue cardigan she wore when she was bracing herself for something. I knew this, because she had worn it at the hospital the 2 times I had seen her there over the years. Once for my grandfather and once for a scare with Richard's back that turned out to be nothing, and she wore it when the situation required a softness she was going to have to manufacture. She looked at me for a moment with something complicated moving through her face, and then she stepped back to let me in. The living room had been arranged for the meeting, the way my father arranged things for events. Chairs pulled slightly forward. The coffee table cleared. Amber was on the couch, her attorney apparently unavailable on short notice, her arms crossed in the particular way she crossed them when she was performing composure that she did not fully feel. Brandon was not there. His absence was its own statement. Richard was standing. He began talking before I had fully taken off my coat. He said this was all a misunderstanding. He said the insurance claim had been an error in the paperwork, a confusion about whose name should have been on what, a clerical situation that could be resolved without all of this. He said the word family. He said it again. He said it a 3rd time in a sentence about what families did when things got complicated, which was that they came together and they sorted things out between themselves, and that was what he wanted to do today, to sort this out between themselves as a family. He used the word family 3 times in 2 minutes. I counted. That was how I knew. I stood with my coat folded over my arm and I waited until he finished. He ran down like a clock that needed winding, the sentences getting slightly shorter toward the end, the pauses slightly longer. And when he was done, there was a moment of quiet in which he seemed to expect something from me, a concession maybe, or a softening, the way I had always softened when he needed me to. I said, "I already corrected it." He looked at me. I said that the corrected claim had been filed the previous week. I said that when a fraudulent insurance claim is corrected and the original is flagged, the referral to the Attorney General's office happens automatically. I said that I could not undo that because I hadn't done it. The process had done it, and the process did not take requests. I said that Carol Tremblay's civil suit named Amber as the driver and Brandon as a material witness, and that Brandon had already agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for immunity, which meant his statement about the dashcam card was now part of the record. I said all of this in the same voice I used to explain a diagnosis, not loud, not theatrical, the way you said things that were true and did not become less true because someone didn't want to hear them. Amber said, "You had no right." Richard said, "That's enough." He meant it for both of us, but he was looking at me. I said, "I had every right. You filed a fraudulent claim in my name. You used my identity to cover an accident that injured a woman who spent 6 weeks in physical therapy. The paperwork had my name on it. The correction had my name on it too. Those are the only 2 documents in this situation that belong to me." Richard said I was being vindictive. He said it with the particular wounded dignity of a man who had spent decades defining the terms of things, what was acceptable and what was excessive, what was justified and what was going too far, and who had never once expected those definitions to be declined. Amber said I had destroyed the family. Diane was on the far chair, very still. She had been crying quietly for the last several minutes, the kind of crying she did where her face didn't change much, but her eyes were wet, and she kept pressing her lips together. She was not looking at anyone directly. She was looking at the middle distance in the way she looked at it when she was deciding which version of events to carry forward. I noticed that I had no desire to respond to any of what they were saying. It had been said. It would keep getting said. None of it was going to change what had already been filed, what had already been submitted, what was already processing in offices and courtrooms in Hartford and Glastonbury, and wherever the AG's office ran its referrals, moving forward on its own momentum, now not needing me to do anything else. I picked up my coat. Amber stood up from the couch. She moved toward me and she grabbed my arm, her hand closing around my forearm above the wrist, the same grip she had used since we were children when she wanted to stop me from leaving a room before she was finished. I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at it the way I looked at things I was going to have to address clinically, with full attention and without the feeling getting ahead of the fact. I said, "You put my name on a hit and run. You do not get to talk to me about family." I said it quietly. I was not performing it for the room, though the room heard it. I was saying it because it was the accurate sentence and it needed to be said by me, in my own voice, in this particular room, before I left. Her hand dropped. I put on my coat. I walked to the front door. Diane made a small sound behind me, not a word, just a sound, and I kept moving. The door closed behind me. The cold hit immediately, that flat January cold that had no interest in negotiating, and I stood on the front step for a moment and breathed it in. The cul-de-sac was empty. A neighbor's porch light was on. Somewhere down the block, a dog was making its opinion known about something. I heard the door open behind me. I knew who it was before I turned around, not because of the footstep or the breathing, but because I knew the way you know certain things when you have grown up in a particular orbit, from the specific quality of the hesitation. Ruth walked past me and went inside. She had been 20 minutes behind me. She had always been going to come. She had known about this meeting before I had. I understood that now, the way I was understanding many things now in reverse, seeing the structure of them from the other side. I stood on the step and listened. I could hear her voice through the door, level, unhurried. The way she said everything. She was telling him she loved him. Then she was telling him she had removed him and Amber from her will. No anger in it. No volume. No performance for the room. Just the information, stated once, in the same voice she used to tell me dinner was ready when I was 7 years old. To silence after it was the loudest thing in the house. I walked to my car. I sat for a moment with the key in the ignition, and the engine not yet started, and the cold settled around me in the way cold did when you stopped moving. And through the picture window of my father's living room, I could see the shapes of people inside the light on, and I could not see their faces from where I was parked. I started the engine. I pulled out of the cul-de-sac. I did not look back. 3 weeks later, Forsyth called me on a Wednesday morning while I was at my kitchen table with coffee. I had actually remembered to drink while it was hot, which felt like a minor victory in the context of the previous 2 months. He said Richard had been charged, filing a fraudulent insurance claim, a felony federal jurisdiction, because the claim had crossed state lines when it was submitted, the Hartford address against the insurance company's processing center in New Jersey, which made it a matter for people with bigger offices than the ones on Asylum Avenue. His firm had received the arrest notification that morning. Richard's position at the accounting firm was, as of that week, under review pending the outcome of the charges. He said Amber had been charged with hit and run and criminal negligence. The dashcam footage, the tower data, the witness statement, Brandon's full cooperation, all of it together made the evidentiary picture clean. Her nursing license was under mandatory review hold, which meant the hospital's HR department had received the police report automatically and the review board had opened a file. She was not in prison. The charge for a first offense hit and run with a cooperative victim settlement typically carried probation and community service. But the license and the career it represented and the reputation she had built in the particular way she had built it, on performance and visibility and being the one in the family who was doing something impressive, those were gone, or going. The process was ongoing, but the direction was clear. He said Brandon had accepted immunity. His full written statement about the micro SD card was in the record. The engagement announcement Amber had posted in December, the one with the ring and the restaurant and the caption about forever, was no longer on her profile. Forsyth said all of this in the same measured way he said everything, item by item. And when he was done, there was a pause, and he asked if I had any questions. I was standing by the window. I had gotten up at some point during the call, and I hadn't noticed until I was looking out at the street below the January morning. A woman walking a dog in a red coat, a delivery truck idling in front of the building across the way. I said I didn't have questions. He said he would be in touch as the AG matter developed. He said Carol Tremblay's attorney had indicated she was satisfied with how the civil proceedings were moving. He said to take care of myself. I thanked him and hung up. The woman in the red coat was gone. The delivery truck was still there, the driver carrying a stack of boxes through a propped open door. I stood at the window with my phone in my hand, and I waited for something to happen inside me, some arrival of feeling that matched the scale of what had just been said. The charges, the license, the engagement announcement gone, replaced by nothing, by the clean absence of a thing that had been posted with such certainty. What came was not what I expected, not satisfaction, not the clean, sharp feeling of something resolved. It was quieter than that and less comfortable, a tiredness that was not unpleasant, the specific fatigue of a long thing finally finished. The way your body feels after a 12-hour shift when you finally sit down, not bad, just fully aware of everything it has been carrying. I put my phone on the counter. I finished my coffee. I went to work. 2 days after Forsyth's call, on a Friday evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Connecticut area code, Glastonbury Exchange. I almost let it go. I was on my couch with my shoes still on the particular state of a person who arrived home and got as far as sitting down before running out of momentum. And I looked at the number for 2 rings and then answered. She said, "Is this Maya Jones?" I said it was. She said, "This is Carol Tremblay." I sat up. She did not say anything for a moment. I did not say anything either. There was a particular quality to the silence between two people who have never spoken but have been in each other's lives for months in complicated and uninvited ways, and I let it be what it was. She said, "I wasn't sure I was going to call. My attorney thought it might complicate things, but the settlement is signed and the complication window is closed, so..." I said, "I'm glad you did." She said she had been thinking about what to say for a while. She said she had started a few different versions of this call in her head over the previous weeks, and none of them had felt right, too formal or too much like a speech. And she had decided she was just going to say the thing she actually wanted to say. She said, "I sat in physical therapy for 6 weeks, and the whole time I kept thinking about what would have happened if nobody had known. if the plate hadn't been on camera, if I hadn't found a lawyer who knew what to do with the cloud account, if your grandmother hadn't been keeping records since March. A pause. I just wanted to tell you that somebody knew, that's all. I said, I'm sorry it took this long. She said, it took what it took. She said it without bitterness. Just as a fact, the way certain facts were, the timing of things, the way things moved when they moved through the systems they had to move through. It took what it took, and here we were on the other side of it. I said, how are you doing now, if that's okay to ask? She said she was doing better. She said the hip was mostly right again, some stiffness in the mornings. She had been told that might be permanent or might resolve over the next year. Nobody could say exactly. She said she had gone back to volunteering at the library, which was what she had been doing in her retirement, and that being back in that building with those people had helped her more than most of the other things she had tried. I said that sounded like a good place to be. She said, it is. There was another pause, shorter, and she said she should let me go. She said she hoped I was all right. She said it simply, not as a pleasantry, but the way you said it to someone when you actually meant it and were leaving space for it to be true. I said I was getting there. I sat on my couch with my shoes still on and the phone in my lap, and I thought about the man in the ER parking lot on New Britain Avenue, the one with the laceration on his arm and the bruising along his hip, the one who kept saying he was fine. I had told Simone that afternoon that these cases always had more evidence than people thought. Cameras everywhere, phone location data, witnesses who wrote things down. I had said it a week before I knew Carol Tremblay existed. I had said it as professional observation, as a note about the way hit-and-run cases were presenting differently than they used to. And I had been sitting with Simone at the nursing station, and neither of us had known that I was describing my own case, that the evidence I was describing was already filed, already waiting, already in a folder in a lawyer's office with my name on the registration and Carol's name on the intake report. I had not known I was already in it. I had been in it since November 14th, since before that, since March, since the day Ruth bought the car and sent the paperwork to my father and set the first piece in motion. I had been in it without knowing, the way you could be inside a story that other people were writing without anyone ever telling you the genre. I took my shoes off. I put them by the door. On Sunday morning I drove to Fairfield County. Ruth's house looked the same way it always looked. The wreath still on the door, the candles gone from the windows now that Christmas was past the walk, shoveled clean in the precise way she shoveled it, all the way to the edge of the property line and no further. Her car was in the driveway. The smoke from the chimney was thin and steady. She opened the door before I knocked. She looked at me the way she had looked at me all my life, with the particular attention of someone for whom looking was not a passive act. Taking inventory. Checking. She stepped back, and I came in. The house was warm. Not the oppressive holiday warmth of Christmas dinner, packed with people and cooking smells and the particular heat of a room trying to hold 12 people comfortably. This was the house's regular warmth, the warmth of one person keeping one set of rooms at a reasonable temperature for herself. And it was exactly right. She went to the kitchen without saying anything, and I sat at the kitchen table. The same table. The same chairs, the same blue-checked placemats she had had since before I was born, slightly faded on the side that got more light. I had done homework at this table. I had eaten after-school snacks at this table on the afternoons when my parents were working late, and Ruth was the one who had picked me up, which was most afternoons for a while in the years when Amber was in her activities and I was not in mine. Ruth came back with 2 mugs. Chamomile. The specific kind she kept for certain occasions, not the everyday tea, the chamomile in the tin with the yellow lid that she kept in the back of the cabinet. I knew the smell of it before the mug reached the table. She had made it for me after school sometimes, when I had had a hard day, and I had never told her the day had been hard. She had just known, the way she knew things, by observation, by that particular attention she paid to the people in her orbit. She would set the mug in front of me without comment, and we would sit, and I would do my homework, and eventually I would talk, or I would not. And either way, she had already made her position clear. She was here. The tea was hot. The rest was mine to decide. I held the mug with both hands. Ruth sat across from me and held hers. We did not talk about the legal proceedings. We did not talk about the charges, the license, the will. We did not talk about Christmas dinner or the key fob or the documents assembled over 8 months in the back room of a law office on Asylum Avenue. We sat with the tea. Outside the kitchen window, the backyard was the gray-white of a January that was almost February, the grass dormant, the bird feeder she kept stocked all winter holding a cardinal that sat for a moment and then left. The light was thin and even. It came through the window without any particular urgency. I held the mug and I thought about 8 months, about what it had cost Ruth to do, what she had done alone, to sit in rooms and make calls and compile documents and wait out of loyalty to her son, trying to find the line between what she could live with and what she could not. She had found the line when Carol Tremblay crossed a parking lot on November 14th, and a car that belonged to no one in my family by any honest measure drove away. I thought about 6 weeks of physical therapy, about receipts kept in a folder, about a woman sitting in a waiting room with her hip in pain, holding on to the evidence because it was the only thing she could control, not knowing yet if anyone was going to do anything with it. I thought about the 8 months between those two things. Ruth compiling, Carol waiting, and me at the hospital working nights, parking in the garage on level 3, carrying my badge home on the lanyard, not knowing any of it. I almost said it, almost set the mug down and said, "You waited a long time, I know why." But she waited 6 weeks in a room doing exercises to get her hip back, and you were the only person who could have made it shorter, and you didn't. I held the thought. I turned it over. I looked at Ruth across the table with her chamomile tea and her pastel cardigan and the hearing aid she had remembered to put in. And I thought about all the rooms she had sat in over 25 years watching things she could not stop and choosing over and over the loyalty she had to a son who had not earned it. She had finally chosen differently. I didn't say it, not because I had decided it didn't matter, but because I had decided this was not the moment. And because some things were true and did not need to be said to remain true, and because Ruth already knew. She had known since November 15th, when she had pressed record on her phone at my father's kitchen table, what the cost of her waiting had been. She carried it. I could see that she carried it. I chose to sit with her in it rather than name it. The cardinal came back to the bird feeder, sat for longer this time. Ruth said, "You look tired." I said, "I am." She said, "You should sleep." I said, "I know." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, the small dry hand I had known my whole life, and held it for a moment, and then she picked up her tea again. We sat until the mugs were empty and the light through the window had shifted toward afternoon, and the cardinal had come and gone 3 more times. Then I put on my coat and she walked me to the door, and I drove back toward Hartford on I-95 as the late afternoon went dark around me. The same highway, the same exit signs, the same stretch of road I had driven on Christmas night going the other direction. The smell of the hospital badge in the car, the tinny radio, the calculation already running in the back of my mind about how long I could stay and when I could leave. I was not running the calculation now. The highway was mostly clear. The late Sunday travelers and the commuters who had pushed their return trips as far as they could, and I drove in the particular ease of a road that was asking nothing much of you. And I thought about my father's voice when he said the word family for the 3rd time in the living room in Wethersfield. The specific quality of it, how much he had needed me to hear it as a claim on something, as a door I would be unable to close, as the weight that had always brought me back. I had heard it. I had let it land. And then I had said what I came to say and put on my coat and walked out, and the word had not reached the place it used to reach. That place was not the same size it had been. I did not know exactly when it had changed. Sometime between Forsyth's office and my kitchen table, and the moment I had written my name on the corrected filing and folded it into the envelope. Sometime in that span, the door I had always left open for my father had stopped feeling like a door I was choosing to keep open and had started feeling like something I was simply maintaining out of habit, the way you kept a light on in a room you had stopped going into. Somewhere on the highway between Fairfield County and Hartford, I noticed that I had not checked my phone since I left Ruth's house. Not for his name, not for a text that wasn't going to say what I needed it to say and never had. The checking was just gone. The waiting behind it was gone. I had not decided to stop. It had just stopped, the way some things stop when you are not paying attention to them, quietly and without announcement. The Hartford skyline came into view, the lights of it against the dark, familiar and ordinary. The city I had chosen and stayed in and worked in and driven to and from at all hours for 3 years. I took my exit. They called it a family, and they meant a silence they needed someone to keep. I kept it for 31 years. I am done being that quiet.